Hello again. So funny story happened. Yesterday I recorded this lecture and the one for chapter 14, and I started on another lecture for another class. And then I went in to edit them at the end of the day. So I was sitting there going, okay, I'm going to have everything up on time. Um, well, I recorded it without audio somehow. My settings weren't correct, and I'm using OBS, by the way. So yeah, that was fun. So here I am recording this again, but that's okay because technology happens. And so let's go ahead and continue talking and finishing out chapter 13. And I've gotten a lot of practice in, so I should be really good at it this. So let's go ahead and discuss all the different glands. So today what we're going to go over in this half of chapter 13 is we're going to go over all the different glands. And then we're going to talk about what hormones they produce or hold or store or release. And then we're going to talk about each of the hormones. Now keep in mind, a lot of the hormones I'm mentioning today will continuously keep popping back up throughout the semester. So yeah, this isn't a one and done and then we move on. No, these hormones are going to come back. So that's why it's like I need you to actually know what the ones I'm mentioning, because they come back. They come back over and over again in all the systems that we're going to be speaking about from here on out in the rest of the semester. And I'll be mentioning that when they pop back up again. So keep in mind, and they like to use abbreviations for a lot of these. So if you're in a chapter couple, chapters down reading around and you hit, FH and you're going, what's FH? Yeah, well, this is where we have to hammer it in. So anyway, so Monty and I are back again. He's being a bit of a wiggly. He's about to shed. And we are going to jump into the rest of chapter 13, part 2. All right, so the pituitary gland, this is the master gland. He is the one that, under the control of the hypothalamus, pretty much tells the body what to do through all the different hormones he releases to either tell the rest of the glands in your body to turn on or off. So he's also known as a hypophysis, and he's about at the base of the brain, and he's about 1 centimeter in diameter. He's pretty tiny, but he's packs a big punch. Now, he's got 2 lobes. He's got the anterior lobe, which is slightly bigger than the posterior lobe. The anterior lobe is known as the adrenal hypophysis, and the posterior pituitary gland right here is called the neurohypophysis. Excuse me. Too many H's, too many O's, too many P's. But hey, they didn't ask me to name these things. So the hypothalamus is right above, and you'll notice in the names right here for the anterior and the posterior, what they're controlled by is actually in their name. So adrenal hypophysis. So in other words, the anterior lobe is under the control of the other adrenal glands. In other words, he gets feedback control, and that's how he basically tells what's going on in the body. And the other one, the posterior lobe, is actually under direct control of the hypothalamus through neurons. So there is actually a neuron bundle of neurons going down through the stalk right here, which is known as the infundibulum, because that's a fun word to say, infundibulum. I don't know why, I just kind of find that fun. There's some words in this class that I just find it's fun to say them. So anyway, we'll hit that again when we talk about the kidneys. I talk about the comphysis all the time, and it looks cool. So anyway, the stalk or the infundibulum, and there's a nerve tract that goes down into the posterior lobe. So the posterior lobe is under direct control of the nervous system, while the anterior lobe is under control of the endocrine system. So that's what that hypophyseal portal system. So blood vessels to the anterior pituitary, direct tropic hormones, direct access. So he's getting hormones from other glands to tell him, hey, we're done. Maybe you can lower the dosage of what you're putting out. So there's a feedback loop happening right here into the anterior lobe that is not happening to the posterior lobe, which is why the anterior is called the adrenal hypophysis, and the posterior is called the neurohypophysis, because he's under control of the central nervous system. And yes, I do repeat myself repeatedly. I think it's a throwback from, unfortunately, teaching high school for way too long. But I want to make sure that you are understanding it, and I'm hopefully communicating it correctly. Anyway, so the anterior pituitary gland has 6 hormones, and these come back, and we talk about them a lot. Like I said, I'm not mentioning just these for funsies. These are coming back to you later. So, for instance, first one, growth hormone, or GH. This controls the growth of the body. It targets bone, muscle, and adipose tissue. And this is the one that really hits you while you're growing, but also doubly hits when you hit puberty. So right now my son, who is 9, I like to use him as an example on occasion. He's, definitely has growth hormone pumping through his body because he's a growing boy. Interestingly enough, you actually do not grow like at a constant rate. You actually have different dips and gaps. We'll talk about more of that when we talk about growth and pregnancy and whatnot. So growing is actually kind of interesting because it isn't just an exponential rise. It's kind of like more like steps. It's like your body takes a break and your brain grows, and then your body takes a break and your brain grows. So it's interesting. We only have so many resources in our body to actually grow our body and or grow our brain. So sometimes that's why growth spurts happen, because the body's putting energy into growing the brain for a while, and then all of a sudden it will flip and say, oh, it's time to grow the body, and then growth spurt. So if you're wondering why kids get growth spurts, that's why. It's usually because that pause in between growth spurts is where the body is switching all its growth energy into expanding and developing the brain. So kind of interesting. Anyway, next up, prolactin. We won't be talking about this until we talk about pregnancy, but just to let you know, because he will come back then, this stimulates the production of milk by the mammary glands. It targets the mammary glands, and boy, does it. It also has a double feature, along with another hormone we're going to be talking about in a little bit later down the road, and that is, it also helps the uterus to heal and shrink back to normal size after birth. So prolactin, it's pro, meaning, start or first, and lactin, milk. So anyway, makes milk, but it also has an interesting side effect, is it helps us heal after birth. Us ladies, because you guys don't have to worry about the birth thing. Lucky. Anyway, trust me, we'll get into it when we get into all the fun stuff at the end of the semester, when we talk about the different sexes, and then we talk about pregnancy, birth, growth. That's all coming at the end of the semester. So anyway, then there's thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH. Now this targets the thyroid gland, which is a butterfly looking gland. We'll talk about him in a minute. That's actually around your esophagus right here, and I'll tell you the story of my thyroid in a minute. So, but basically he controls the secretions of the thyroid gland. So basically this one has to be cascaded out of the pituitary to turn on your thyroid to tell your thyroid what to do. Like I said, remember, the pituitary gland is your master gland. He is the one that turns on and off all the other glands in your body. Speaking of, adrenocorticotropic hormone. So this is another one. This actually secretes hormones by your adrenal cortex. And your adrenal cortex is on your adrenal glands, which are sitting on top of your kidneys. And again, we're going to talk about them in a minute. So they need to be turned on too by the pituitary gland. And we'll talk what they secrete when they're turned on by this. So again, pituitary controls the other glands in your body. And these are just 2 that are extremely important to controlling the other glands, so we know not to turn them on and off, randomly and wildly. Because remember, hormones are powerful things. We mentioned that in the last lecture. Just a little bit can make a big difference in your body. And we've definitely found out the hard way through bodybuilding illegally over the years. So anyway, now next up, the next 2 are ones that actually affect your sexual glands. So in other words, follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, trust me, he's going to pop up a couple of times, so we'll be talking about him big time. So And the same thing with luteinizing hormone. He's going to pop up again. So, in females, follicle-stimulating hormone stimulates the maturation of the ovarian follicle and ovum. And in guys, it stimulates the maturation of sperm in the testes because they too have to actually gestate before you can release them. So it's a gonadotropin, which targets primary sex organs, which is the ovaries for us ladies and the testes for the guys. So again, same thing with the luteinizing hormone. It response depends on sex. In females, it causes ovulation. In males, it causes the secretion of testosterone. So that way you guys get the, hair on your face and the deep voice. And we'll talk about that in a minute because there's a third one that helps with that as well. Again, it's a gonadotropin, which targets ovaries and testes. So these are gonadotropins. And these two work in conjunction for us ladies for the regulation of our, hold on, it's coming to me, our period. Trying to look for the more technical term in my head because it's floating around, but your menstrual cycle. There we go. My brain keeps trying to kick out the wrong word. You ever have that happen when your brain kicks out the wrong word and you're like, really? That's not the word I'm looking for. Yes, it starts with the first letter, but that's not it. Ugh, silly brain. Silly brain, right, Monty? He doesn't know. His brain's the size of a pea. Anyway, no, really, I have a thing in the back of my lab here that actually shows different brain sizes. And yeah, snake brains, about the size of a pea. All right, the posterior pituitary gland. Now, he doesn't make hormones. Unlike the anterior, he makes 6 and releases 6. The posterior, he holds 2. That's it. He doesn't make them. These 2 hormones that he controls are, interestingly enough, are made by the hypothalamus. He doesn't make them. He just holds on to them for the hypothalamus and stores it until the hypothalamus pretty much tells him to release it. So again, remember, he's controlled by nervous fibers. So, oh boy, let's see if we could say this. The superior particularly apophyseal tract. Yeah, that's not going to be on the test. Anyway, of the hypothalamus. That, so again, doesn't make hormones. That's a test question, though. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That's a test question. But he does store them. So the 2 hormones that he stores and releases when the hypothalamus tells him to is the antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, and he's going to pop up a couple of times. I love talking about ADH, and you're going to be so sick of hearing about ADH by the time we're done, because he pops back up when we talk about the digestive system, and he's going to pop back up when we talk about the kidneys, because he plays major parts in both. So he targets the distal convoluted tubules of the kidney. So just know because we haven't gotten to the kidney yet. And basically what he does is he tells the kidneys to reabsorb water back into your system instead of just letting it all out. Because water balance is extremely important. Water balance gets its own chapter later. That's how important it is. So, and because we're controlling water balance, it also increases blood pressure. This also has another name, and watch out, that's a test question, vasopressin. So ADH is also known as vasopressin. So watch out, my friends. Yes. Could that be a tricky test question? It could be. It could be. So oxytocin. So in conjunction with our friend over here, prolactin, he not only helps with the release of milk, but again, targets this smooth muscle and helps heal after birth. So this causes uterine muscle contraction and milk released from suckled nipples, and thought to help with the bonding of mother and baby bonding. And this is actually where babies use their powers against us with their babiness. Interestingly enough, babies actually do put out pheromones because our babies are extremely helpless. Unlike Monty, of course, he's a guy, and number 2, he's a virgin. He's never been with a lady. Yeah, sorry. Anyway, so babies actually, especially our babies, do put out pheromones to smell really, really good. That's why some people swear and go, oh yeah, babies smell amazing. Before I had my son, I was like, yeah, babies don't smell good. And then I had my son, and boy, did he smell amazing. I was like, wow, he smells good. And that's part of it. And this is another one. So they use these pheromones on top of us releasing oxytocin to sit there and go, I love my baby. So they're using psychological warfare, those helpless little babies. Big soul. And so anyway, and it was funny because I had a student one term that was super pregnant for the first half of the class, and then she gave birth over Christmas break and came back to class afterwards. Whew, that's amazing. And it was funny because she's like, you were right. My baby smells amazing. And I'm like, I know. Crazy. All right, thyroid gland. So again, the thyroid is located around the larynx, below the larynx, around your trachea. And it looks like a funky bow tie, except it has this like sticky uppy bit right there. Anyway, it's composed of follicles involved in iodine uptake in order to produce T4 and T3, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Now, it's interesting, there is a back half because it wraps around your trachea, and there's a back half with parathyroid glands, which we'll get to in a minute, because the hormones the thyroid gland puts out works in harmony with the parathyroid glands, which are stuck on the back of the thyroid gland. Weird, yeah, but hey, I wasn't there when everybody built this stuff, so. Now, it's fun or not fun exactly, but it was weird because I have my own experience with my thyroid gland doing something that was not supposed to happen. At one point, I woke up with a lump on my neck. Now, to put this in context, my younger brother, when he was in high school, he was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. And how they discovered he had cancer is all of a sudden there was a lump on his neck, and suddenly he couldn't talk because interestingly enough, the tumor was pushing his vocal cords over and paralyzing them, so he couldn't talk. And we thought he was just hoarse because he sounded hoarse from maybe having laryngitis or something like that. When you get a cold or a flu and then you sound like poo for a while. Yeah, that's what we thought it was, and then it turned out to be cancer. Yeah. So I woke up one morning on my birthday, double trouble, and I had a lump on my throat. So, after going through all that stuff with my family and my brother, I was like, oh God, I have cancer too. So I went to the doctor, and the doctor goes, it's your thyroid is swollen up for some reason. I'm like, oh no, my thyroid. And I'm like, oh God, I'll have to take hormones medically for the rest of my life. And then, you know how it is. You start panicking and kind of freaking out. And then, so I went to one doctor and he's like, yeah, you're hypothyroidic, which means, you're below. Hypo means below, which means you're not putting out enough T4, T3. And I'm like, oh God. And then I went to another doctor because he's like, let me refer you to another doctor. So I went to another doctor and he said I was hyperthyroidic. And I'm like, wait, the other doctor told me I was hypothyroidic. And I'll get to what hyperthyroidic actually does to your body when we talk about the hormones in a minute. And it was crazy. So I was just like, And so hyperthyroidic means we're putting out too much T4 and T3. And that can actually lead to a lot of crazy things, including your eyes kind of bugging out of your head. And then last but not least, I finally got referred to a proper thyroid gland specialist. And he did a biopsy, and, he stuck a whole bunch of needles in my neck. Lots of fun, not. Anyway, and but he said, you're fine. The thyroid is functioning perfectly fine. What I think and what I've seen happen is what happened is there was a benign piece of cancer that somehow started up inside the thyroid, but my immune system came in, killed it, and left a little pocket, if you will. And that pocket started filling up with body fluids because the body fluids get into everything. They get their own chapter too. We'll talk about what interstitial fluids are and how they move all over your body. But that pocket unfortunately caught them, and it swelled, and that's the bump I saw. That's why it swelled up. And I'm sitting there, panicking that, oh God, my thyroid, I'm going to explode, So, and he said it's going to go one of two ways. Either the body figures it out and they'll, the water will get shunted out and it'll go back to normal. Or unfortunately, sometimes it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and 6 months down the line we might have to drain it. But the thyroid works fine, and you're fine, and you're not, cancerous, and it's all good. And he was right. In a couple of months, all of a sudden the lump went away, and I haven't had a problem since. So that's me and my thyroid gland wackiness. If you have similar stories about things, please feel free to, if you want to share. You don't have to. Don't feel pressured. In the forums, feel free. It's like, oh, I had this experience myself with something like XYZ. I love talking about these things. So please, converse with me in the forums that will be under these as soon as I get this edited and up. Now, let's talk about the hormones it makes. Oh yeah, one quick thing before I move on. It says iodine uptake. FYI, one of the first things that if there's a nuclear fallout, and I know you're like, where did this come from? I like talking about nuclear accidents and stuff on occasion. But unfortunately, one of the things that gets pushed out that a lot of people don't realize is radioactive iodine in the air. And unfortunately, our thyroid gland is really stupid, so it sucks up all the iodine it can, and including if it's radioactive. And a lot of people, especially what happened with Chernobyl, a lot of people showed up with thyroid cancer really quickly afterwards, and if they were in the blast zone. So yeah, thyroid, you've got to protect it if there's a nuclear explosion in some form or fashion. I hope not, hope not. But just letting you know, sometimes our bodies are kind of dumb. And we'll get into that in some places. There's just some places your body's just like, and you're like, why did you do that? So, anyway, thyroxone and tioridothyroxine as T4 and T3. So this increases the basal metabolic rate by stimulating cellular oxygen to produce ATP. It regulates your metabolism. T3 is the more potent form, so it lasts less. You'll see that in a chart. I'm going to show you in a minute how long it lasts. Or actually, no, I showed it to you in the last set of lecture, didn't I? Yeah, I did. Anyway, however, 90% of it circulating is T4. Now, and that's what I mentioned when you're hyperthyroidic, you're pumping out too much of this. And it actually is like, if you've ever had, a buzz from too many energy drinks or too much caffeine, and you're like, got to do all the things. Yeah, this is like that times 20. It's not good. You might be like, oh, I've got the energy to get all this work done in like 5 seconds because I'm like, oh, super focused and getting everything done, except your eyeballs bug out and you're constantly really, really crazy thirsty. And this is not good because, like I said, it's to basically stimulate your system to make, use the oxygen we're breathing in to turn it into ATP and to regulate our metabolism. This sets our metabolism on high, and it's not a very good way to go. So, yeah, that's why if you're hyperthyroidic and your eyes start slightly popping out of your head, yeah, you might want to get to a doctor and get your thyroid gland checked. Same thing if you're pumping out really low volumes of this. You are really, really tired all the time. You can't catch your breath. It's really bad because you're not making enough. You're not telling, the body to use the oxygen to turn it into ATP to move everything. So that's why, get your thyroid checked. A lot of times, a lot of people don't think to get these checked, and come to find out it's one of these two issues. All right, enough about that. Let's talk about calcitonin. So this is triggered by an increase in blood calcium levels. Now, this targets our bone cells and distal convoluted tubules. Again, that's the kidney. We'll talk about him in a minute, actually in a couple of chapters. And therefore causes a decrease in blood calcium until levels go back to normal. Now, blood calcium is extremely important because with the parathyroid hormone, he does the reverse with calcitonin. He has a hormone he puts out that makes you uptake calcium, make you pump more calcium out of your bones, so that way if your blood calcium levels decrease too far. So he's the one if you've got too much blood calcium, the other one's if you have too little, which is helping in maintaining not only your bones but your muscles. Keep in mind, remember from last semester, your muscles need calcium to run, or else your muscles just seize up, lock, and don't work. So that's why we've got to be very careful in maintaining the balance of blood calcium to help maintain that you can walk around and, do daily activities. And we'll get more into that in a second when I talk about the parathyroid hormone, which is right now. Amazing. So these are 4 small glands on the back of your thyroid. Bing, 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 bing. And they release parathyroid hormone, which does the opposite of calcitonin. So if you have low levels of blood calcium, this stuff triggers because he senses it in the blood and he goes, oh, we don't have enough calcium in the blood. Our muscles aren't going to work. Everybody, bones, please start releasing. Hey, we need to make vitamin D so we can absorb more calcium and phosphate. And therefore, this increases blood calcium and phosphate back to normal. So between the balance of this one, calcitonin, and parathyroid hormone, it maintains the homeostasis of calcium in your blood. And as I mentioned a second prior, it's important because I don't know if there's a show I love to watch when I had TV. I got rid of it because I wasn't watching TV. But I used to watch on Animal Planet, The Incredible Dr. Pol. He's a veterinarian. Awesome show. But you would see on occasion, especially on milk farms for cows, that, after the mom gives birth to her calf, some of them would actually literally, their entire body, all their muscles would seize up completely and they'd almost fall over. And they couldn't move, including, remember, you need your muscles for your heart and your lungs and a lot of other things too, not just moving. So they'd instantly call the vet, or some of the bigger things usually have kind of a vet tech on hand with calcium. But they've literally come out with this big bottle of a glass bottle of liquid calcium, and they come out and they literally plug it into the cow and to save the cow's life because she's lost too much calcium in giving birth and producing all the milk. And for the baby and for, us to milk them, because we've bred them to do that over the centuries. So unfortunately, though, we've got to be on top of it because we don't want to lose the cow. And that is, we go in and just plug the bottle of calcium, and let me just, so I don't dump my water on myself, and then upend it and let it drain right into the cow. And then a couple minutes later, the cow's back up doing cow things, licking its baby off and, hanging out with its calf. So, that's why we need calcium. If we dip too low in blood calcium, it's really, really not good for our muscles and could cause our entire body to seize up and, not good. So, you don't see it too much in humans, but, cows, like I said, they produce a ton of milk because we've bred them to over the centuries. And giving birth is very, very, very taxing. Uses a lot of calcium as well because you're using all your muscles to push out a baby out of you. Right, Monty? You wouldn't know. Your kind lays eggs. So anyway, that's double trouble for cows. And that's why usually somebody's on hand with a bottle of calcium to plug into them if this arises. Anyway, next up. Our adrenal glands. So these guys live on top of your kidneys. I do not know why. They have different shapes. But they do have different shapes. But they live on top of your kidneys. They hang out. And they pump out hormones that have a lot to do with digestion and other things. And actually some not so much. Some of them pump out and talk to your sex glands. So we'll get there in a minute. So anyway, so they're divided into an adrenal cortex and an inner medulla. And you're going to see those two words over and over again this semester. Cortex means outside, medulla means inside. There's a cortex and a medulla in your kidneys. There's a cortex and medulla in your lymph node or your master lymph nodes. So yeah, you're going to see the words cortex, which means outside, and medulla, which means inside an organ, over and over again in this half of the semester. So we're gonna hit that, aren't we, Monty? Yes. Anyway, so depending, and remember what we talked about all the way back when we were talking about the anterior pituitary, we have the adrenocorticotropic hormone. That basically hits the cortex. It's even in the name, adrenal cortex. So that actually affects the cortex, which then affects what's being put out. So now, these two things have a lot to do with your fight or flight response. So the hormones that your adrenal gland hormones are split up between the ones that are produced in the medulla, the middle, and the ones that are produced by the outside. And are stimulated, or the cortex, and are stimulated by your pituitary gland. So let's talk about the medulla, the inside first. These are very, very much function with your sympathetic division of your autonomic nervous system, so your fight or flight. So say, zombies are coming at you and you're going, oh God, zombies. So that puts you into your fight or flight. And what that does is you start pumping out epinephrine and norepinephrine, which is, again, adrenaline. So this is where the adrenaline in your body comes from. Notice the name adrenaline is similar to adrenal. So these hormones target the SA node to increase your heart rate, your smooth your smooth muscle, and your diaphragm, so that way you can breathe deeper and get more oxygen in because you're running away from a threat, or a car's coming at you and you go, ah, and then you run out of the way, hopefully not get hit. Like, those people that accidentally drive their cars through the front of a shop. It's because they forgot which one the brake is. And yeah, we've all been there, I think. A little bit, sort of, kind of. Anyway. So, this is your fight or flight. So this is what the fighter is. So this is where these hormones come from to assist you with getting into fight or flight mode. Then, the hormones of the adrenal cortex also start pumping out stuff. For instance, aldosterone, which increases your blood pressure. Again, we're getting the blood pressure moving around faster so we can make more available use of glucose to turn into ATP and, get rid of wastes faster so that way our muscles aren't fatigued as quickly. And then my favorite, or not really, he's kind of cortisol, which regulates your glucose metabolism. So what happens is cortisol, if you're under a lot of stress, and we're going to talk about stress in a minute and how stress can absolutely wreak havoc on you because your body doesn't realize the difference between stress over studying of a test and stress over, nearly getting hit by a car. Your body really can't differentiate. So we'll get into that in a bit. And cortisol basically says, oh God, we've got this extra glucose. I'll turn it into, something else. So that way we've got it for later, which is why you start gaining fat if you're stressed all the time. It's this guy right here. He's like, oh God, I'm stressed. So we might as well, put all this stuff away for later. So that way you can survive if, invaders come and invade our land, or, your body doesn't know. It's just, it knows you're under stress. And so it's going to respond to that stress by prepping your body to be as, ready to deal with the stress as humanly possible. And that's not always a good thing. Like I said, your body doesn't know the differences between stress. We'll get there. So anyway, then it also makes supplemental sex hormones like estrogens and androgens. By the way, andro means male. And so an androgen is for the males. Estro is for the ladies. Does estro mean women? No, that's gyno, which is why if you, are a doctor for the ladies, you are a gynecologist. I forget what estro means. I'll pop this in later. Anyway, so I'll go look that up. Anyway, so interestingly enough, if you have an Android phone, it's a boy because it's an Android. Now, if you've got any other type of phone, I don't know what sex it is. It's a phone, guys. Anyway, so Just FYI. Also, keep in mind we have a mix of these two things, just like we have a mix of estrogens and testosterone. You know, guys normally have more testosterone than they do estrogen, and ladies usually have more estrogen than they do testosterone. But we all have a mix, and sometimes those can go out of balance. Anyway, next up is the pancreas. The pancreas is going to get talked about twice. He's so special because he is part of your digestive tract, but he's also part of your endocrine system because he has two jobs, and he's good at them. So he lives behind the stomach, and he's a mixed gland. So he's both an endocrine gland, which is, endocrine system, and an exocrine gland for digestion. So, possible test question. Anyway, endocrine portions are the pancreatic islets, or the islets of Langerhans, which I just like saying the islets of Langerhans. Yes, you can mess with people. Where are you from? The islets of Langerhans. Oh, where's that? On my pancreas. Doesn't make sense, but it just sounds cool. All right, but this is what brings us to basically diabetic. Because what's happening here is in the islets of Langerhans, there are alpha cells and there are beta cells. And the alpha cells put out a certain hormone, and the beta cells put out another hormone. So the alpha cells put out glucagon. So if you're like running on fumes, you haven't eaten in a while, and your body is like, oh God, you're starting to get hangry. That happens to me. It doesn't happen to my mother. She seems to run on nothing. I don't understand that woman. Anyway, but I get hangry just like my grandpa. If you don't feed us, we get hangry. Anyway, but basically what happens is we have low blood glucose levels. So, and it senses this, and it starts putting out glucagon, which basically goes out and tells the liver and other parts where we've stored sugar or glucose in different ways, like fat or glycerol, that it's time to break that back down and release it into the bloodstream, because she hasn't eaten in a while, and we really need glucose for the cells to keep functioning. Especially the brain. Your brain is actually insanely hungry, which hopefully you learned last semester. The brain eats, I think, like 60% of everything you eat goes to the brain. I think. I need to double check. This is why I have notes. I write these things down. Anyway. So, yeah, our brain be hungry, which is why we get the hangry. Because we don't have enough glucose. So that's what glucagon does. Alpha cells, glucagon, low blood sugar in the bloodstream. So therefore it says, release the sugar from where we have stored it. And usually that's the liver and other places as well. And it releases the glucose into your bloodstream so you can function and find food. Anyway, the other half is if you've got too much blood sugar. That's where insulin comes in. Insulin is produced by the beta cells of the islets of Langerhans, and they are stimulated by the increase of blood sugar. So right after you eat, or right after, I'm rooting around in my kitchen because I've got the munchies, because I'm naturally like that. I've always had the munchies. But anyway, I'm rooting around looking for something covered in dark chocolate, and, if I find something, I eat it. And then my body goes, oh God, she got into the chocolate again. So that's where insulin comes in. Too much glucose. So what happens is it promotes glycogen formation in the liver. It's like, here, liver, please reabsorb this. Or unfortunately, or into the skeletal muscle. It's like, hey, reabsorb this, or please use it. And if not, then it gets turned into fat. So that's what insulin does. It says, we've got too much, let's break it down, please reabsorb, please do this. However, too little or too much blood sugar can kill you. And if you've got diabetes, or have a member in the family who's got diabetes, you know this. And there's different types of diabetes, type 1, type 2. Type 1, you're born with it. Type 2 usually is later onset. But sometimes it's done because the beta cells aren't working properly. Sometimes they don't put out any, which is like type 1. Or sometimes they don't put out enough insulin whatsoever. And that's where you get a lot of the type 2s coming in. where the beta cells aren't putting out enough insulin to keep up with how much you're intaking. So, yeah, so that's why we have to inject insulin after, a diabetic eats, so that way they can break down all that blood sugar, so that way it doesn't kill them. Because too much of a thing is bad, and you're going to find this over and over. Remember, it's the concept of homeostasis, maintaining balance. And everything in your body has to maintain balance to stay optimal, aka alive. Now, other endocrine glands. Let's talk about the other guys. So we've got a pineal gland. This is attached to the thalamus of the brainstem, so back here. He secretes a hormone called melatonin, and his production is stimulated by daylight. This is where our circadian rhythm comes from. It affects our moods and our emotions, because you probably know as well as I do, if you don't get enough sleep, you be cranky. And you hate it when somebody points that out. It's like, why are you cranky pants? It's like, oh, don't even. Or, somebody comes up, you got a case of the moon days? And then, you want to... No violence. Anyway, but unfortunately, we've got to be careful with this. Interestingly enough, blind people who are totally blind, not like partly blind, they don't see daylight. And because of that, this isn't stimulated. The pineal gland isn't stimulated, and they don't make melatonin, which completely throws them off any type of circadian rhythm, which is why they have to be very careful, and some of which even have to be put on drugs to induce melatonin creation in your pineal gland, so they can maintain a circadian rhythm. So blind people actually have to get their pineal gland stimulated. Because without a circadian rhythm, anybody who knows that, I'm sure you have experienced this as well. If you've disturbed your sleep rhythm, or sleep, what is that? For well, it's rough on your body. So, imagine somebody who doesn't know whether it's day or light, and how that can completely bork up the pineal gland. So, yeah. Next up is the thymus gland. It's located in the mediastinum region behind your sternum right here, and it produces a hormone called thymosin, which basically affects the maturation of your lymphocytes, which we're going to talk about in the next chapter, which is all about your blood cells. So this plays a very important role in your lymphatic system and immunity, and it decreases as we age. For some reason, it shrinks. So we'll talk more about him again in the next chapter, and how we create T cells using this hormone. All right, now last but not least, let's talk about our other glands downstairs. For us ladies, the ovaries. So it's an ovarian follicle, and ovum start to mature each month following puberty under the influence of FSH. And then under estrogen, when we hit puberty, bango, estrogen, our estrogen levels skyrocket, leaving our testosterone behind. And we suddenly start getting our secondary sexual characteristics. So it targets our mammary glands, makes our breasts develop, our genitalia, and adipose tissue in the hips, the thighs, and the buttocks. So, yeah. Moment on the lips, forever on the hips. Thanks, estrogen. Anyway, testes, on the other hand, FSH targets them, causes production of sperm. Luteinizing hormone targets the testes, causes production of testosterone. And then all of a sudden your testosterone skyrockets and leaves your estrogen far behind. And that develops your sexual characteristics at puberty and maintains them through life. In other words, you get hair follicles in your facial, your pectoral, and your axillary and intraguinal regions. Because, cover yourself in hair. Body logic. And genitalia enlargement, muscle and bone growth and strengthening, and the vocal cords thicken, and you get the deep, manly voice, which I can't do, but, sad. And that's why you get when you hit your teenage years, and you get the cracking, where you get the, I am now a man. You start up here, then it cracks, and then you get, man. There you go. Sadly, my brother only cracked for one day, and that was it, which meant I only got in one day of teasing him about it. I'm his older sister. It's what we do. Trust me, he could tease me back just fine. All right, let's talk about stress. This is actually one of the most interesting parts of this chapter. There's a couple things I like to mention as someone who has been trained in working with at-risk youth for a very long time. So there are types of stress. There's physical, which is an injury. So you get like when I fall upstairs, because I'm a gifted individual. And then you got exercise, which is purposeful. We actually injure ourselves purposely to get stronger. Because remember when we talked about last semester, when we talked about the bones and we talked about the muscles, and exercise strengthens these by causing like mini microfractures, and then your skeleton is actually fixing itself, and pretty much you've got a new skeleton almost every 3 years, depending on what you're doing. Yeah. What about you, Monty? He has no idea. Anyway, so exercise, purposeful physical stress, and helps with some psychological stress too. Sometimes just taking a nice walk or getting the stress out of my shoulders is nice to do with some exercise. Anyway, psychological. So emotions, that's automatic. But you can get overload, which can be self-induced, which is hysterical. Your book points this out. It's like, yeah, you can be psychologically overloaded. You think? So anyway, general stress syndrome is a hypothalamic response to stress. Basically, it activates our adrenal medulla. Remember, he's pumping out adrenaline. And then cortisol releases in long-term stress, and a basic goal is to increase available nutrients to fight off the stress. So cortisol is like, reserve all that food, reserve all that glucose, because you never know, we might need it to run away from zombies. And, I don't know about you, but there's not too many zombie attacks that I know about. However, people that are under stress all day, every day, this does actually alter their brains, especially children. So this is where I'm going to yap about paper tiger syndrome and things that I've been trained in and saw myself for the 16 and a half years I was teaching high school with at-risk youth. And if you're going, woof, that must have been interesting. It was, but I really enjoyed it. So what happens is this. We've been discovering that stress from a very young age can have a huge impact on a developing brain. If you're under stress, that activates your fight or flight response, which is natural. It's what saves your life. However, the fight or flight response in your body was not meant to be on 24/7. It's on in case of an emergency. That's literally what it's built for, to save your life, to get out of an emergency situation, whatever that may be. They give you the energy. Like, the moms and dads that you see their child in danger and all of a sudden they've got the power to lift a car. Stuff like that. It's not supposed to be 24/7 stress, 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 stress. Well, unfortunately, as we all know, we live in a society and a world that unfortunately induces stress, 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 stress. And because we don't all live in ideal conditions, and depending on however you want to get into that. But, there are things like, and I apologize ahead of time, trigger warning here, because I'm going to talk about some sensitive subjects, but there are things like, unfortunately, physical abuse and mental abuse and sexual abuse. And unfortunately, there are people and children out there that are going through this right now. And this triggers their fight or flight response. Because again, like I said earlier, your body is bad at figuring out which, stress is like, we need to save our lives, and which stress is, because they're trying to survive 24/7. Trying to get away from whatever abuse that is. And that messes with your developing mind. And it puts you on a hair trigger. Because your fight or flight response is going 24/7 because you're trying to survive 24/7. So that's why, a lot of people that are under this tremendous amount of stress are on a hair trigger, and they're really easy to get them upset in any form or fashion. And especially with my students, you sit there and you say, you failed a test. They don't care because they don't know where they're going to sleep tonight, for gosh sakes. And these are things that as educators and people who are going into the medical community need to realize. that this happens. And that's why a lot of my students and my former students are extremely defensive. And you've probably seen it too. And I hope you haven't experienced it, but maybe you have. So I apologize ahead of time. But, and that happens. It's like, it's why they snap at you. It's just like, I don't respect you. It's like, some of them don't have any trust in adults because what adult has ever treated them correctly? Because they're on survival mode 24/7. And that messes with the brain, and especially when the brain is developing, and especially in your teenage years where your frontal lobe is developing, which is why teenagers notoriously make bad decisions, because their frontal lobe is still developing, and the frontal lobe controls impulse control and decision making. So you're not going, that won't end in a broken bone. But now imagine that under somebody who's trying just to survive day to day to day to day. Yeah, so stress, the general stress syndrome, it's bad. And like I said, it can make people sense the paper tiger. In other words, they've been under so much stress for so long, even a paper tiger looks dangerous when you should be afraid of a real tiger, and a paper tiger is nothing. So situations where, I sit there and say, hey, could you please get out of the bathroom and go to class? You don't get to talk to me like that. That's where that comes from. So just an FYI, because like I said, if you're going into medical fields and stuff like that, you're going to see this. And it's kind of interesting in a sad way. So there you go. Now, lifespan changes. Endocrine glands shrink with age and accumulate fibrous connective tissue fat and lipofuscin, but hormone levels usually remain within normal levels. Decreasing levels of calcitonin and parathyroid increase makes, unfortunately, so your blood calcium goes out of whack and you get into the osteoporosis risk. Now, for us ladies, we use a lot more calcium because we're constantly going through our menstrual cycle and whatnot, and that uses a ton of calcium to do. If you've ever had cramps, So that's why we use up a lot more calcium than guys do. However, guys catch up around age 70, I think. I think it says in your book age 70. So they catch up about age 70 to, have the same amount of frail bones. But women get there first because we're using calcium way more than guys do until we both hit our 70s, and then we even out. So muscle, liver, and fat cells may develop insulin resistance, which, again, this is where type 2 diabetes comes in. Sometimes you can beat it with exercise, and sometimes, unfortunately, it just runs in the family, and it's something you've got to deal with. Changes in melatonin secretion affect the body clock. I see this a lot in older folks. They're up at weird times because, again, pineal gland is going, what? And they're going, what? And that's why you get them wandering the halls in nursing homes and whatnot. I had, teachers myself. They're like, I didn't get any sleep last night. And that's okay because I got everything done. And it happens to us all. Thymosin production declines, hampering infectious disease resistance. And we're going to get into that in the next chapter. Okay. So, with that said, that's all of Chapter 13. Highly recommend you go ahead and watch some of the videos. The Bozeman Science is really good. Also, Part 2 from Crash Course about hormone cascades. So those are the two. Even though I list a ton of videos, if you want to watch a few of them, cool. But these are the ones I put in my notes. If you were here in person with me, we'd actually watch them at the end of the lecture during class time. So, because I always have more than one person talk about these things. So that way you can get, hopefully, a more robust view of what's going on. So with that said, remember to answer questions in the forums. And if you have any questions, also post them in the forums, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. So with that said, I'll see you in the next chapter. Bye!